They already suspected the thing in the mine was a plague spirit, so Linn and Geralt pulled out the specter oil they'd prepared and carefully worked it along the edge of the silver sword. Applying the right oil to a blade made a real difference. It could mean the difference between a scratch and a killing blow. Every Witcher knew that. Identify the foe, oil the sword accordingly. Get it wrong, and the oil could be useless or even counterproductive. Once the silver blade was ready, they began taking potions. The mine was pitch black. Cat was a necessity. Petrie's filter, which amplified signs, was the next. Against incorporeal things like spirits, signs and silver were both vital, and Eredin in particular was almost miraculous. Finally, Tawny Owl to speed recovery of stamina and vigor. The potions hit them fast. Linn's face drained, the veins in his temples standing out, eyes itching as a faint tearing feeling nagged from deep inside. Classic signs the toxicity had reached a dangerous threshold. If he took more, even a Witcher could die. Geralt, by contrast, looked much less affected. Linn realized the White Wolf's tolerance was holding. Geralt had taken an extra wolf potion for agility and a thunderbolt for strength to give them a safety margin against whatever lay ahead. They checked their alchemical bombs one last time and moved forward. As they were about to go deeper, both men froze and turned at the same instant. Footsteps, deliberate, light on the timbers, coming from the shaft they'd just left. Spirits didn't make footsteps. They did not draw steel. They simply watched. A torch bobbed down the shaft, and Thor, Brovar's son and the dwarf captain who'd led them here, emerged. The potions had taken what they wanted from Linn and Geralt's faces. When Thor saw them, his own torch nearly slipped from his hand. "Master Hunters, what happened to you?" he blurted. Linn's expression remained flat. "Thor, what are you doing here?" "I came to warn, to rescue you, masters," Thor said stiffly. Then, quicker, he added, "I can give you 500 Oren right now if you leave." He pulled a coin purse and flung it toward Linn. Linn let it thud to the floor. The coins inside chimed. Thor swallowed and rushed on, the words tumbling out like an attempt to cover his nervousness. "Listen, I respect Witchers. I risked coming down here, but the monster inside is worse than anyone imagined. The Elder lied to you. You won't be paid what he promised." "You won't get 4,000 Oren and the Gwyer sword he promised?" Linn asked, dry. Thor's hand trembled. "No, he lied to you. You won't get a single coin because you'll die down there." His voice echoed down the shaft, part warning, part temptation. "Take 500 and live." Linn's face did not change, but his tone sharpened. "Thor, Brovar's your father, isn't he?" Thor's eyes darted away. Guilt flared on his face. I don't know what you mean." "You offered us money to leave," Linn went on. "You're trying to sweep this under the rug. If whatever's in the mine isn't dealt with, it will eventually threaten Brovar's rule. So you want us out so the problem doesn't get traced back here." Thor's posture shifted. He tried to cover. "I was only being sensible. Why risk your lives for nothing? Take the coin and go." "You should know something about duty," Linn said quietly. "Professional ethics, loyalty to the mission, living up to villagers' trust." Thor snapped. "Shut up! Who do you think you're talking to? Take the money and leave. I won't say this again." Linn met the dwarf's anger with the same coldness. "Whoever's behind you, even if you're the planner, any plot against Brovar will fail. Leave now, and at least you'll live to pack your things and go." Thor's fingers tightened on his axe. He stumped forward a step and let loose a laugh that was too small. "You asked for this, scoundrels. I'll kill you both. I have a tortoise stone." He bared his teeth. With it, even a Witcher'd be helpless. Linn let the laugh that rose in him be almost derisive. The dwarf rumor about tortoise stones, that they could stop Witchers, was as widespread as it was useless. Dimeritium could shut down signs. The tortoise stone was just a superstition people liked to believe. He didn't mean to use signs on Thor, nor did he draw steel. Thor swung his axe, a heavy, brutish arc, and Linn sidestepped with a single smooth motion, avoiding the blade. He followed through with a tight uppercut that cracked into Thor's chin. Geralt watched the whole thing. It wasn't until Thor hit the ground like a log that he finally spoke. "You didn't kill him, did you?" "Of course I held back," Linn shrugged. "But he's Brovar's son. Best thing is to hand him over to the Great Elder." Linn produced a length of rope and bound Thor's hands and feet behind his back. "No idea why he defies his sire." he said. "But he won't do a thing now. He can only wait here until we return." Geralt nodded. He agreed with the plan. That abandoned mine that sickened the miners lies further in. Whatever's causing it must be bound to the mine somehow. If it could wander very far, those barricades and boards at the entrance wouldn't have stopped it. He glanced at Linn. The way Linn had tied Thor wasn't merely practical. The knots were intricate, almost artful. Geralt felt a strange appreciation for the craftsmanship. A bold, absurd thought popped into his head. He would like to try it on Yennefer, provided Yennefer didn't beat him to death for the idea. Noting the expression on Geralt's face, Linn explained, "It's called tortoise shell binding. Folks back home, in the East, play with ropes like this when they're prosperous." Geralt couldn't think of any Eastern country in the Northern Kingdoms where people did that, but he didn't press it. The diversion ended. They moved on. They walked another hour through the dark tunnel. The farther they went, the less obvious the work of miners became. At last, a somewhat roomy cavern opened before them. It had clearly been a miner's rest camp. Everything was rotten and eaten by time. In the center, however, a faint violet light glimmered. Linn went closer. The light came from a small magical barrier. A runestone fed it constantly. Inside, several tattered parchment manuscripts lay preserved from decay. "You read first. I'll keep watch," Linn said. Geralt pulled his silver sword from his back, spun it once, and stood beside him. Linn nodded, reached into the barrier, and without striking a torch, began to read. He used the cat potion's dark vision to see the text in the gloom. "My name is Casti, leader of the Medicine Salvation Group," the manuscript began. "I leave these papers in the hope they will warn those who come after us. If you find these and are my comrades, read everything carefully. I hope these notes help you defeat the evil hiding deep in the mine. If not, flee. Leave this place as fast as you can." November 6, 897. Great Elder Otto summoned my group and me to Mahakam. Our mission: stop the Great Plague ravaging the Mahakam Mountains. November 10th, 897. Our investigation shows the source of the plague is not disease, but an adamantine mine. It may be a plague demon or some similar thing. Only by destroying it can we end Mahakam's plague. My hand shakes as I write. Is it fear? After seeing the ruined state of the dwarves who have been infected, it's impossible not to be afraid. More precisely, what I fear is not death, but dying in that miserable condition. Still, Irma, the youngest, did not flinch. As leader, I could not turn back. The Medicine Salvation Group exists to save as many as possible. How could we stand aside? November 12th, 897. Beware the thing within the mine. I do not know what it is, only that it is no friend to the living. I'll call them mutants for now. After we killed one, we examined the corpse. It was once a dwarf who worked this mine, but something terrible has altered him. Before we killed him, most of his internal organs were already destroyed. He showed signs of hemorrhagic fever. How could he have survived to this state? November 14th, 897. My comrades and I are infected. Logically impossible. A sorceress should not fall ill. Yet we display symptoms like hemorrhagic fever, just like the mutants we killed. We must leave. November 15th, 897. I have underestimated Great Elder Otto's fear of the plague and overestimated my importance to him. Since my group and I entered the mine, Elder Otto ordered the mouth of the mine sealed. No matter what I said, they refused to open it. Because opening it might mean meeting not a sorceress, but an evil spirit mimicking a sorceress's voice. The blasted guards say, pleading, threats, begging, nothing made them budge. The source of the Great Plague, the Crimson Plague Ghost, clings to me and my companions, as it did to those dwarves. If the Crimson Plague Ghost had not sealed my witchcraft circuit, I could have just moved a finger and blown the door open. With my circuit sealed, I cannot even conjure a small flame. Wait, how do I know the name Crimson Plague Ghost? I have lost track of the date. November, is it? Or December? I cannot remember. Irma could not bear it and killed herself. Then Andy and Randy. Their symptoms worsened until they resembled those we found when we first entered. To protect me while they had any sense, they rushed into the deepest parts of the mine and never returned. Now I am alone, trapped in darkness. All strength has drained from me. My body feels aflame. I fear I will not escape. 897. Whoever reads this, do not stay in the mine more than one day, or you will end up like me." The last line wavered into a smear of ink, then a single, chilling sentence. "Wait, who am I again?" Chapter 43. Here they come. Linn turned the manuscript to the last page. After confirming there was nothing on the back, he handed it to Geralt. While Geralt read through the pages, Linn kept watch. A few minutes later, Geralt finished, frowned, and said, "The year 897? That's over 300 years ago." "No wonder Brovar didn't know about the Great Plague in Mahakam," Linn replied. "It seems Otto, the elder before Brovar, destroyed all related records." Linn couldn't help but think about the sorcerers of this world, how powerful they once were. Alzur, Rafard, names that still carried weight, sorcerers who could sway the fate of nations. When Prince Maribor and Prince Elrond fought for Temeria's throne, the conflict stretched on for generations. It became known as the Endless War. Alzur had tried to force Elrond to give the throne to Maribor, yet Elrond, backed by his armies, refused. In the end, Alzur summoned a monstrous creature that swept Elrond's legions away. Only then did Elrond surrender. But those days had passed. The age of Alzur and Rafard was over, the twilight of the gods, when magic waned. Even the most powerful sorcerers now could not reach Alzur's level. Who would have thought Dimerishim, once like a turtle-shaped pebble before Alzur, would become the bane of sorcerers? People assume progress is inevitable, yet Geralt folded the manuscript carefully and put it away. According to this, we have at most a day in that abandoned mine. The disease that infects the sorceress will probably bypass even a witcher's immunity. Then let's go. Let's finish this as quickly as we can. At the end of the camp, there was a wooden door. Linn pushed it open. It wasn't locked and swung inward on a soft shove. Beyond it yawned a hollow dark. A cold, bone-deep wind blew out of the mine. Walking in, Linn had the uncanny impression they were not in a mined tunnel at all, but in the gullet of some vast creature. The deeper they went, the more the marks of artificial excavation faded. The remaining tooling and timber had clearly been left 3 centuries ago and had rotted away under time's erosion. From behind a sealed brick wall came sounds of scratching and muffled screams. "There are still living people?" Linn muttered. He reached out with an Ard sign, and the blast tore the old bricks apart. Behind the crumbling wall, there was no one, only a pile of white bones. Geralt squatted and inspected the remains with his Lirin and drew a quick conclusion. Bones, dried blood, and mucus, victims from hundreds of years ago. "They were sealed behind this wall," Linn said. "Brovar's predecessor was much harsher than Brovar. Brovar, at least, had isolated the sick. His predecessor had walled them in. Linn tried to tell himself they'd been dead when left here, but the walls told a different story. Deep gouges and scores in the brick were made by fingernails, frantic, last-ditch attempts at escape. They had not been dead when sealed. They had clawed until their hands failed them. A sharp, piercing cry cut from the mine's depths. Something deformed stumbled out from the tunnel ahead, making ghastly sounds. Gua, goo, woo. Before they could get a clear look, it lunged. Linn didn't hesitate. He threw an Ard. The air blast kicked up dust and drove the creature back with brutal force. It slammed into the tunnel wall, bones cracking like dry twigs. Geralt materialized beside it like a shadow, silver flashing. His sword sliced through, the head came free, and the thing went still. Linn knelt and examined the attacker. "Not human," he said. "A dwarf, a miner, judging by the rotten clothes, from hundreds of years ago." Geralt sheathed his silver and pulled a hunting knife, deftly opening the creature's belly. Most of the organs are ruined, signs of hemorrhagic fever. This must be the case described in the manuscript. "The patient who attacked the Medicine Salvation Group," Linn said. "If someone is possessed by the Crimson Plague ghost," Geralt added, "they turn into this inhuman, ghost-like thing. No wonder the manuscript warned future generations never to stay long in the mine." They pressed deeper. Not far along, Linn caught the sound of someone talking to herself. He and Geralt exchanged a look, slowed their steps, and crept forward. In a slightly larger cavern, they found a small, frail figure hunched over a decayed table. She wore a physician's blue robe, now tattered with age, and muttered to herself, "Don't call the group leader yet. I have potions, sutures. I can do it." On the table lay the corpse of another mutant. With her attention fixed on it, she didn't notice them approaching. Geralt glanced at Linn, asking with his eyes for a single word of permission. Even one flick could end her. No living thing could survive 3 centuries in an abandoned mine without food or water. Linn shook his head, and with that, Geralt lowered his hand. Linn stepped forward and spoke plainly, revealing them. "Hello." The physician startled and turned. Linn saw the upper half of her face wrapped in bandages, the uncovered skin around the edges showing clear decay. A surgical knife, a scalpel, was driven deep into her throat, its handle jutting at an angle. The sight matched images from the manuscript Kasti had left. Yet when she spoke, her voice was soft, almost gentle, belying her monstrous appearance. Chapter 44. Brother Jie had never fought such a well-funded battle in his life. "Oh, you're a patient. We only treat minor cases here. Severe ones should see the group leader." Linn glanced at the mutated person on the decaying wooden table. "What are you doing here? Are you treating a corpse?" The woman physician shook her head quickly. No, they're not corpses. Good heavens, how could you think that? I'm only giving them medication to ease their suffering." Linn nodded, then asked softly, "Are you Irma?" Irma covered her mouth in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "Kasti told me," Linn said. Irma looked puzzled. "You know the group leader? But why has he never mentioned you?" "I met Kasti only recently," Linn answered calmly. "Never mind. Irma, besides you, is anyone else here?" Her voice dropped. "The group leader, Randy and Andy, are in the innermost cave, operating on severe patients. You wouldn't believe how many there are. The group leader and the others are overwhelmed. I want to help, but I'm not skilled enough." "You've done plenty, Irma. Don't be hard on yourself," Linn said. "Thank you, kind sir." "You're welcome. We should go. We need to find Kasti. It's important." Irma turned, her back to Linn. A moment later, a silver sword slathered in spectre oil slipped between her ribs and into her heart. "Rest now, Irma," Linn murmured. The woman's corpse burned in a fierce blue flame. Linn snapped his fingers as the fake Irma turned to ash. "I wondered when you'd realize she wasn't the real Irma." Geralt stood beside him. "Kaer Morhen's volumes mention this kind of thing. She's a peculiar, weak kind of specter, too gentle to be a true wraith, yet she shouldn't linger in the world." "Releasing her was the right thing," Linn said, and they checked their surroundings. Satisfied there was no immediate threat, the two prepared for the final fight. They tested how long the potions they'd drunk still held, took more where needed, and verified the alchemical bombs strapped to their belts were within easy reach. Satisfied, Linn strode forward. "Let's finish this." Deep in the mine, the caverns had become a makeshift field hospital. Mutated bodies lay on rotten planks like wounded soldiers. At the center, a wooden table served as an operating slab. On it lay another mutated patient, and 3 figures in tattered blue physician robes clustered around, speaking in hushed, grotesque reverence. "The purpose of surgery is to relieve pain, mercy in motion. Touch the right nerve, and the patient will tell you how it feels," Kasti intoned. His face was withered, like a dried apple, his eye sockets hollow and empty. Listen to its soft whispers, hear the melody of mercy. "Pray, Andy, show us the limits of your charity," another rasped. Andy, his head wrapped in bandages like a mummy, picked up a scalpel and made a careful, bloody cut across the mutant's belly. "You must be gentle. Don't be heavy-handed. We can no longer hear the patient's comforting sighs," Randy murmured. "Perhaps the unexpected guests made them tremble," Kasti added. Then all 3 turned toward the cave mouth. Linn and Geralt entered, silver swords drawn. Kasti inclined his head with a slow, terrible smile. "Come in. I see you seek treatment." Linn recognized the 3 from the group leader's descriptions. "Kasti? It is I. You know me? I don't recall you, but it matters not," Kasti said, the smile never reaching his hollow eyes. "I see your pain. Come, you and your companion, lie on the table. Let us heal you." Linn stepped forward. "Kasti, we're here to finish what you left undone." "You are all dead. Rest now," Kasti replied as if it were a benediction, and at that, Geralt flicked his wrist. A beehive bomb arced through the dim air and detonated among Kasti, Randy, Andy, and the patient. Shrapnel peppered them and the platform. Randy and Andy crumpled soundlessly. Kasti remained standing, crying out a banshee wail that formed a visible pressure wave, gouging the earth as it rolled toward Linn and Geralt. Both witchers rolled aside to avoid the sonic blast. The sound seemed to be a summons. The mutated figures on the planks convulsed, sat up, and surged forward, a tide of living rot. Linn charged like an ice wolf. He slipped past the lead attacker, his silver sword flashing in the gloom. He slit a belly open and viscous. Dark blood gushed out. He drew and threw a hunting knife with his left hand. It thudded into another mutant's forehead. The swarm closed around them from all sides, screams and fetid breath filling the tunnel. Linn slammed an Eredin sign onto the ground. Purple light flared and dragged those who stepped into its trap into sluggishness, as if they were wading through swamp. He exploited the opening, lunging forward in a wicked arc that cleaved 3 chests and abdomens at once. He backstepped and brought his sword up to split open the jaw of another attacker. But more kept coming. Kill 1 and 2 more took its place. They fell back, bladework carving a narrow path, retreating into the mine's tighter passages. The confined space neutralized much of the mutants' numerical advantage. Only a handful could engage at once. Geralt opened with a double gutting across 2 foes and planted an Eredin sign in the gap. Linn answered with an Ard shock, blowing attackers off their feet. "Now!" Geralt barked. Linn pulled a dragon's dream bomb from his belt and hurled it into the mass. It landed among them without immediate effect. Linn snapped his fingers, then Igni kissed the bomb's fuse. A second later, the dragon's dream erupted in a wall of flame, engulfing a dozen or more mutants. Dragon's dream bombs spewed flammable gas and burned savagely once lit. The fire turned the surging horde into charred, writhing corpses. Alchemical bombs were devastating against both monsters and men, but witchers seldom used them. Too expensive, too precious. A used bomb was like burning coin, and many bounties wouldn't even cover the cost of repairing a silver sword. But these two had no such restraint tonight. Elder Brovar had supplied them freely. Bombs, oils, potion components, all handed over at no charge. They could empty their belts without worry. Geralt and Linn fought with a kind of ruthless, sponsored abandon. Cold steel flashed, signs crackled, and alchemical fire answered every surge. For every step they retreated through the tunnel, the mutants left a trail of corpses behind them. It was an ugly, efficient retreat. 2 master swordsmen cutting a bloody trail back toward the source. Just as the flames from the dragon's dream bomb Linn had thrown began to die down, Geralt lobbed a dancing star bomb. Unlike the complex alchemical mixtures they'd used earlier, the dancing star was a simple incendiary, and where its fire met the lingering gas from the dragon's dream, the fumes flared up into a roaring inferno. The cave entrance and its interior were swallowed by the spreading blaze. The effect was devastating. Mutants swarmed into the fire, shrieking as they burned, futilely trying to beat the flames from their bodies. Linn and Geralt hadn't stopped at just a few bombs. Between them, they'd shoved 20 to 30 alchemical charges into the tunnel. The conflagration filled the shaft and even forced the 2 witchers to fall back several meters to avoid being caught in the crossfire. After a long, tense while, the flames finally began to ebb. They moved forward. The cave was a landscape of blackened, charred corpses, every mutant reduced to smoking husks. Is it over? Linn barely had time to think it before his wolf school medallion, hanging against his chest, began to vibrate violently. "Linn, watch out!" Geralt snapped. From the bed of scorched bodies, a red mist rose, pooling and coalescing into the shape of a slender specter before surging straight toward Linn. He threw up a quen, a bright orange shield flared around him. The red mist hit it with a heavy, solid impact, and Linn felt a jolt of energy drain from him. If he hadn't trained his signs to master level, even a continuously maintained quen might not have held. His power was bleeding away. A silver light flashed through the mist, Geralt's silver sword arcing through the air, and a keening shriek split the cave. The red vapor scattered, then reformed behind Geralt. Claws of shadow blurred across the witcher's back. Linn pushed off, quen stowed, and slammed his own silver sword up to meet the descending talons. The clash rang like iron on stone and threw him to one knee. The pressure against his blade kept mounting. The Crimson Plague Ghost pressed, trying to overwhelm him with sheer force. Linn didn't try to match that pressure. At the last beat, he slid his body to the left and broke the bind. The specter, committed to the strike, overbalanced. Linn used that momentum, spun, and drove his blade into the thing's back. The cut met resistance, not the airy nothing that such creatures often presented, and a splash of blood-red mist sprayed across the stone. He felt the give of something real under his sword. He didn't linger. Linn sprang back as the specter lashed out in fury. Purple light blossomed on the floor as Geralt cast Eredin. The rune trapped the specter in place and forced it into its true, corporeal form. Linn's pupils narrowed. "Good opening," he muttered, and took a blizzard potion from his alchemy pouch in one gulp. The concoction hit fast. His nervous system screamed awake. Time seemed to stretch. Combined with his full enhancement specialty, Linn moved in a blur. Where others might manage one strike, he could land 2, even 3 in the same beat. And thanks to the Eredin trap, the hits felt solid. The silver blade no longer cut through mere air. It bit into flesh. Crimson bone and spirit flesh shredded into powder under his blows. Spectre oil smeared the edge of his sword and blackened the wounds, corroding the specter's spirit body with each strike. The Crimson Plague Ghost howled and tried to fend off or dodge, but the Eredin slowed it to a crawl. Every blow Linn delivered landed true and hard. With a long, desperate keening, the specter burned from within and collapsed into a pile of ashes. A heat like a current surged up Linn's arms into his chest. A notification flashed through his senses, crisp and clinical. Attribute points, 2, 15%, 4, 15%. The experience from the Crimson Plague Ghost was substantial, the largest reward they'd had so far, and it underscored just how dangerous the thing had been. Nonetheless, the fight had looked much simpler than it would have for a lone Witcher. 2 Witchers operating together had a huge advantage, and Linn was no ordinary fighter. A master of the Wolf School in both swordsmanship and signs, with alchemy at a proficient, formal Witcher level. Paired with Geralt, their skills multiplied. They also weren't scrimping on supplies. Brovar had funded the oils, potions, and bombs, so they were free to use whatever it took. A Witcher in top condition and a Witcher who couldn't afford proper oils and potions are simply fighting on different terms. Even Geralt had never seen such an over-equipped engagement. Most crucially, Geralt's timing had been flawless. Unless a creature can teleport away mid-strike, it cannot evade while attacking, and Geralt had triggered the Eredin trap at the exact instant the specter was mid-attack, neither too early nor too late. That left the thing committed and unable to retract. A novice Witcher might have trapped it, but lacked the sign power to hold it. Geralt's Eredin both restrained the specter's short-range teleportation and slowed it drastically, forcing its true form to reveal itself and preventing any damage reduction. In short, the mighty Crimson Plague Ghost that had once terrorized Mahakam didn't get a chance to use its innate abilities before it was cut down. When the smoke cleared, Linn and Geralt came out of the abandoned mine with Thor bound in turtle-shell rope, the dwarf tied tightly and glaring as if he still held some dignity. The dwarf guards waiting outside stared in astonishment at Thor's secure bindings, baffled by what they'd been led to. Linn explained what had happened inside the mine. The guards were skeptical, but escorted them back to see Brovar. Geralt didn't go with them. He'd said Linn would collect his share of the reward and hand it to him later. He had somewhere else to check, the isolation ward, where the sick miners had been held. He wanted to see if they'd recovered now that the Crimson Plague Ghost had been destroyed. Leaving Geralt aside for the moment, Linn arrived at the throne hall with Thor at her side and dwarf guards all around. In front of Brovar, she roused Thor. When he took in his surroundings and realized he had failed, he stopped arguing and confessed everything. Thor expected shock and outrage when he finished. Instead, his father's face remained cold and unreadable. "Thor, you disappoint me," Brovar said flatly. "I am truly disappointed. Did you think I knew nothing of you and your conspirators? What do you imagine goes on in the minds of those rebels who seek alliance with the free children?" An incredulous look flashed across Thor's face. Brovar made no effort to hide his disgust. "Put away that expression. I may be old, but my eyes are not dim." Thor sprang to his feet and let out a roar, but 2 royal dwarf guards behind him shoved him back to the floor and held him down. "If that's the case, Father, why do you still side with humans? The persecution of the elves by humans, the suffering of our ancient races, why do you turn your back on them?" Brovar was calm in contrast. "Mind your tongue, boy. You do not know what you are doing." In the empty throne hall, Thor stared at his father's stony face. "My foolish child," Brovar said, Mahakam lies at the center of the continent, surrounded on all sides by human realms. Temeria, the Principality of Elander, Redania, Cadwin, Edirn, Lyria and Rivia, Sodden, and the Nilfgaard Empire. Do you understand the consequences if we choose to fight alongside those free children? He continued. If we did, the kings could send expeditionary forces against Mahakam, or they might simply impose a trade blockade and starve us out. Mahakam is rich in mines but poor in arable land. We cannot support a large population by agriculture alone. Do you truly know the allies you invoke, the elves you call our fellow ancient races? Brovar paused before going on. In 1240, the first elves arrived here on white ships and settled. They came to dominate almost the entire continent. From the shores of the Endless Ocean in the west to the Blue Mountains in the east, from the Dragon Mountains in the north to the Mahakam Mountains in the south, their rule stretched far and wide. The ruined elven cities you see scattered about are proof of that past. Great human cities like Vizima and Oxenfurt were built over the remnants of elven settlements. So tell me, my foolish child, if the elves were newcomers, how did they take so much land from other ancient peoples? Did our dwarf forebears, the gnomes, and every other race simply hand them their homes? Thor fell silent. Brovar sighed. Elves like to cast themselves as victims of human expansion, but were they truly innocent? At the foot of the Blue Mountains and on the shores of Loch Muini lie the ruins of ancient lizard folk cities. In the caves beneath those ruins, the remains of that reptilian people still lie scattered. They lived here long before the elves arrived. The bones and relics bear the marks of swords and knives. You must understand, when the earliest elves came, humans, whom the elves now blame for most of the world's ills, had not yet set foot on these lands. Some elves today say that the lizard folk were already gone when their ancestors arrived, that only skeletons and ghosts remained. My child, would you believe that those lizard folk exterminated themselves to make way for the elves? Thor had no answer. Dwarfs are not simply creatures of action. Mahakam's sons are taught culture and history alongside the ways of the axe and hammer. Thor had once been taught this history and later forgot it in the heat of youth. Brovar's words awakened that memory, and Thor himself unconvinced. Father, he said, that was the past. Perhaps you are right. Perhaps the elves were our enemies long ago. But now the greater enemy is human. The past is the past. The present matters. The elves are no longer enemies, but potential allies. We have a way out only by joining the free children. Brovar shook his head. A flicker of pity finally creased his face. No, you are wrong, my poor child. You are blinded by the noble-sounding ideals of the free children. Do you know what you ask for? You ask for countless dwarf lives to be spilled for your madness. You have not seen that the so-called free children are pawns. Have you not heard their rallying cry, drive the humans back into the sea? Do you know who coined that phrase? Nilfgaard did. The very humans you now hate are manipulating this conflict, encouraging the elves, supplying arms and support, so Nilfgaard can profit. What you see as a struggle for justice is, from start to finish, part of a much larger conspiracy. The free children are a tool of the South in a scheme against the North. Do you truly want dwarf families torn apart because of the South's ambitions? When the guards led Thor away, he was a changed man. The fanaticism, the passion, the idealism had gone. All that was left was the hollow look of someone who had seen his illusions stripped away. Brovar's words had shattered his plans and aged him in an instant. As the guards passed Linn, Thor leaned forward and whispered, "I'm sorry." The Witcher turned to look, but Thor's face remained blank, and his eyes were unfocused, not aimed at anyone in particular. Perhaps the Witcher had simply misheard. After Saul was led away, the throne room fell into an oppressive silence. No one spoke. The mood made Linn reluctant to bring up the matter of payment with Brovar directly. He wasn't worried that Brovar would renege. The commission had proven both his and Geralt's worth. No sensible man would offend two Witchers who could handle a crimson plague ghost for a few thousand oren. Still, Linn kept his silence. After a time, Brovar broke it. "Huntermaster, you did well. Not only did you complete the task I set you, you exposed the traitors who conspired against me. Your mission is over, and now I'll keep my promise. Bring the items." two cloaked dwarf attendants appeared through another door and approached Linn. One carried a box that, when opened, revealed neat stacks of shining gold coins, 4,000 oren in all. Some bore the likeness of the late King of Temeria, others that of King Foltest. Regardless, every coin was whole, uncut and unblemished. The other attendant held a sheathed Gwyer sword with both hands. Linn set the money at his feet and took the sword. He drew it. The blade was entirely silver-white, cold and mirror-bright, a shallow fuller running down its center. The hilt's pommel had an openwork design, likely for decoration. By instinct, he drew his own steel sword as well, taking steel in his left hand and the Gwyer in his right, and touched their blades together. They rang with a crisp clang. His steel blade immediately took a chip, his own sword showed a clear nick and a spreading hairline crack. The Gwyer, however, remained flawless, glinting as if new. Linn couldn't help the audible gasp that escaped him. This was, without question, a genuine Gwyer, the real thing. Brovar watched with a satisfied smile. "Well, Hunter Master, I told you the truth, didn't I?" Linn returned the swords to their sheaths and bowed solemnly. The reward had been agreed, 4,000 oren and a Gwyer sword. Brovar could have handed over an ordinary dwarf-made sword and gotten away with it. Many dwarf blades, even of common steel, outlasted human-forged ones, and by the time any defect showed, excuses could be made. But Brovar had kept his word. Linn had learned long ago that a promise kept was rare and invaluable. Weapons were a witcher's second life, and Brovar had entrusted him with a priceless one. A bow was the least Linn could offer. Before they left the throne room, Linn told Brovar about the Medicine Salvation Group. Brovar promised to send men to the mine, retrieve the bodies, and give them proper burial. He would raise a solemn monument in the mountains so that Mahakam would remember what had been sacrificed for the dwarves. Linn left the hall carrying the 4,000 oren and the Gwyer. He returned to his guest room to wait for Geralt. Not long after Geralt arrived, he had been to the isolation ward. The red rashes and blisters on the afflicted miners were receding. Geralt believed they would recover without medicine. Linn felt relief. Witchers took work for pay, but they were judged by results. Half measures and quick profits only brought trouble later. Vesemir had taught him that. Vesemir had been right 1,000 times. Linn split the money and handed Geralt 2,000 oren. Then, because the reward had been offered to them both, he held out the Gwyer. Geralt took it, examined the balance and edge, and admired it with the quiet appreciation of a man who'd spent decades on the road. Even he had never seen a better Gwyer sword. Then, to Linn's surprise, Geralt handed the sword back. "Geralt?" Linn said, startled. "Take it," Geralt replied evenly. "Elder Brovar's reward. It's yours." "No," Linn answered quickly. "This is our reward together. And besides, it'd do more good in your hands." "I believe you'll put it to use," Geralt said. He pushed the sword into Linn's grip without explaining further and rose. "Now that Brovar's commission is done, I'll find Istrad and tell him we can set off with him." "You've done more in this campaign than many witchers do in a year. Rest. You've earned it," Geralt added, and left. Linn watched him go, the complicated swell in his chest unfamiliar. In that moment, something fell into place. He understood why other Witcher schools had dwindled to a handful of names, while the Wolf School still held together. The bonds between its members, the way they honored one another, the simple decency that made a man like Geralt give away what he could easily have kept. Linn stroked the Gwyr's cold blade and made a quiet vow to himself. He would not let the Wolf School die. He would do his part to restore the Witcher's glory. Chapter 48. You can cheat your brothers, but don't cheat yourself. That night, a grand banquet was held in Mahakam. All the dwarves were invited. For the evening, everyone stood equal, regardless of rank or station. There was plenty of beer and roasted meat, both a thank you and a farewell. The revelry wound down in the latter half of the night. Geralt had been plied with so much alcohol he was sent to his room stone drunk. Linn had slipped away quietly halfway through, so he hadn't been forced to drink much. He sat on the bed and began to examine the spoils from the mine. First, there was a small bundle of ashes left after the Crimson Plague Ghost had been destroyed. Linn and Geralt had wrapped them carefully in felt and brought them back. They weren't keeping them as a macabre trophy. Those ashes were specter dust, a valuable alchemical ingredient dropped by many malignant spirits. With buckthorn and crowfoot, it could be brewed into Petrie's filter, a potion that amplifies a witcher's signs. Sorcerers used specter dust in their own concoctions as well. It was sold by the gram and never cheap. Seeing the full pouch made Linn smile. Selling some to a sorcerer later would net a tidy sum. Next, he opened a lidded glass dish. Inside lay a red, fleshy orb, like the thalamus of a brain, a mutagen, another spoil from the Crimson Plague ghost. Mutagens were priceless to witchers, though few monsters dropped them. They had three principal uses. First, they were an essential component in the decoction used in the trial of the grasses, the grueling, toxic process that transformed boys into witchers. Different schools used different ingredient blends, so each trial produced somewhat different results, but mutagens were always required. Second, mutagens could be used to brew powerful special decoctions. These were far more toxic than ordinary potions, but granted stronger effects. A Noonwraith decoction could shorten the duration of hypnotic states or blindness, and a Chimera decoction could drain an enemy's blood to heal the drinker, and so on. Third, and perhaps most coveted, mutagens could be used for secondary mutation. The trial of the grasses made witchers what they were: faster reflexes, greater strength, enhanced senses, improved recovery and resistance to poison. But secondary mutation could push those changes further in a chosen direction. Mutagens came in red, blue, and green. Red boosted strength, blue enhanced signs, green improved vitality. Each came in weak, normal, and strong grades. The one Linn held was a strong red mutagen. As someone who had transmigrated from Earth, Linn already knew where to find the recipes and rites for secondary mutation, in the fairy tale duchy of Toussaint. Toussaint not only offered secondary mutation, but also Grandmaster-level diagrams for several schools and side quests that could shape the future. He made a mental note that he would have to find an opportunity to visit. 2 days later, recovered from the abandoned mine's battle, Linn and Geralt set off down the mountain with Istrad's caravan, leaving Mahakam. They rendezvoused with Yarpen's group, who had been waiting in a village at the foot of the Mahakam Mountains, and together they headed toward Freeport, to the north. Freeport lay in the Pontar Valley, built along the upper reaches of the Pontar River and hemmed in by thick bushes and forests. Istrad chartered a boat there so they could sail the Pontar straight to Novigrad. The Pontar, sometimes called the Ponta, and known to the elves as the Yaruga River of Alabaster Bridges, was one of the North's great rivers. Like its southern counterpart, it rose in the Blue Mountains, ran east to west, and emptied into the sea near Oxenfurt and Novigrad. The river flowed through 4 countries, forming the northern border of Temeria and Aedirn and the southern border of Redania and Cadwin. The region where these 4 realms met was called the Pontar Valley, or simply Pontar. From ancient times, the Pontar had been a vital trade artery in the north, and the nations lining its banks had bled for control of it for generations. There was an old saying, "Whoever controls the Pontar controls the north." Yet despite that belief, no single power ever managed to hold the river entirely, and the north remained divided to this day. Chapter 49. Shocking. Geralt also has such a past. A week later, the ship carrying them reached the mouth of the Pontar, Novigrad, the most important and prosperous city in the north. Novigrad lived up to its reputation as the Pearl of the North. Gulls clustered on countless masts, the port thrummed with people, and the streets were full of life. After disembarking, Istrad sold half the high-quality weapons from the Mahakam Mountains that had been on the wagon. He made a tidy sum in Novigrad crowns. During the caravan's few days in the city, Linn and Geralt took the chance to restock a large supply of alchemical ingredients. Novigrad, the city of endless desire, drew merchants from across the northern realms, and alchemical wares were plentiful, if not always cheap. Prices weren't particularly favorable, but that didn't matter. They had learned their lesson in the abandoned mine. Without enough potions, oils, and alchemical bombs, the Crimson Plague Ghost would not have been so straightforward to defeat. If they met another ugly beast on the road, they might not get another opportunity to replenish in time. Besides, money was meant to be spent. Converting coin into equipment and supplies that increased their chances of survival was the only sensible investment. So Linn and Geralt shopped hard, taking whatever they needed for commonly used potions, sword oils, and bomb components. They also took their silver sword to a Novigrad smith for repair. A gwihir, a steel sword, is good for cutting men, but against beasts spawned by the conjunction of the spheres, only silver would do. By the time the sun set and the alleys turned the color of embers, Linn checked their purse back at the tavern and found they had spent almost 50 oren during the day. Against the 4,000 oren they had been paid, 50 seemed petty, but witchers rarely saw 4-digit rewards. Most contracts paid 3-digit sums at best, and earnings were generally squeezed low. They owed their comfortable windfall to the generosity of Elder Brovar. Had their patron been stingier, they might have ended up out of pocket. It was easy to see why, after the order split, the Witcher schools faded. Low pay, high costs, and a terribly skewed effort-to-reward ratio wore people down. Ambition and ideals eroded. Many fell into brothels, drank away their pay, and lost themselves. Eventually, one of them would be killed on a contract or fall foul of a peasant with a pitchfork because he couldn't or wouldn't pay. A few days later, the caravan left Novigrad and continued north by boat. They passed Praxida Bay and put ashore at the mouth of the Bula River, already within the borders of Targor County. Targor lay at the northern edge of the known world, at the foot of the Flying Dragon Mountains. No one who had crossed the Flying Dragon Range ever returned alive. Along with the Blue Mountains, they were called the Edge of the World. Targor had once belonged to the kingdoms of Kovir and Povis. After the Povis split, Targor and several small territories broke away and became independent. The ruler of the new state was Benefica, a woman rumored to be a child of disaster, cursed with the Black Sun. The Black Sun curse, also called the Dark Sun or the Curse of the Black Sun, sprang from a prophecy by the sorcerer Edibad, who drew on texts from the Wasgorian necropolis, the Doshin megaliths, and the legends of the hairy folk. Edibad read a solar eclipse as the omen of the sorceress Lilith's return, Lilith still worshipped in the east as Naya, and foretold that she would be reborn through 60 maidens wearing golden crowns who fill the valley with blood. When the prophecy first spread, dozens of beautiful girls from rich and noble families suffered. Sorcerers hunted children of disaster, killed and dissected them, sometimes alive, trying to prove the curse. After many brutal examinations, they admitted the impossible. It was hard to tell a supposed child of disaster from an ordinary maiden, so they began locking those girls in towers, isolating them from the world. The plan had perverse consequences. Rescuing a beautiful girl from a tower became fashionable among nobles, and towers were themselves dangerous prisons. Over time, some of the imprisoned girls died, some escaped, and some were neglected once they grew older. A number of survivors, warped by their suffering, grew cruel. Geralt's infamous epithet, the Butcher of Bravican, came from an episode when he single-handedly slaughtered a gang in the town of Bravican. Their leader, Renfri the Shrike, was herself one of those children of disaster tied to the Black Sun. Of course, not everyone believed Edibad's prophecy. Skeptics dismissed it as Mad Edibad's frenzy. Benefica had been imprisoned in a magic tower for years before she escaped with outside help. During the Povis split, she seized the moment, beat her rivals, and took power in Targor. Perhaps because of what she had endured, her rule was harsh. Rumor had it that the most common landmark in Targor was the gallows. Night had fallen. Thick clouds smothered the sky, and the world was without a single star. A caravan moved slowly along the main road to Targor City. Their scout, who'd ridden ahead to reconnoiter, returned at a gallop. After hearing the report, Istrud rode over to the Witchers. "Master Linn, Master Geralt," he said, "our scouts found an inn ahead. We can spend the night there." Linn nodded. An inn beat sleeping in the open, hot food, a proper bed, and a hot bath. The whole caravan brightened. They pushed on, and before long the inn's yawning lanterns came into view. A rotten wooden board, the inn's sign, hung on the wall, creaking and swaying in the wind. The paint had long since peeled away. The letters were crooked and illegible after years of rain and sun. No one around here cared much what the inn was called anyway. The innkeeper had been waiting at the door and brightened when the caravan appeared. He waved a few of his folk to help with the horses. The place was understaffed. Linn and the others had waited in the common room on the first floor for a long time before food finally arrived. To be fair, the cook could only get things cooked. As for flavor, that was another matter. In a remote spot like this, people were content with hot plates. The hall was quiet except for the sound of people eating. The owner, at least, was industrious. While they ate, he hurried off to heat water for baths. With so many travelers, everyone had to take turns. The financier Istrad took first pick, then Linn and Geralt. Their performance on the road had earned them goodwill. The others didn't mind waiting a little longer. After his bath, Istrad began assigning duties. He left 3 men to watch the stables, to look after the horses and the wagons. He didn't trust the inn's help, nor would he risk a theft. Better safe than sorry. Linn, exhausted from the day since disembarking the ship, felt sleepy after his bath. He said goodnight to Geralt, went to his room, lay down, and sank into sleep. He didn't know how long he slept. When he woke, it wasn't to sunlight streaming through the window, but to pitch darkness. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He checked that he was actually awake, then got up and moved to the window. Outside, there was a deathly silence, as if the whole world had shrunk to this single inn. Linn's gaze dropped to the stable area, the place where the caravan's wagons were parked. When he'd first come in, he'd taken note of it. Now it was shrouded in blackness. Something was wrong. Why hadn't the 3 guards left by Istrad lit any torches? Torches kept wild beasts away, provided warmth, and above all gave a sense of security. That the stables were unlit suggested trouble. As the thought formed, a faint sound reached him from above, the slow creak of old wood on a beam. Linn sprang to his feet. In a single stride, he was at the bed, snatched up the gwair he'd acquired in Mahakam with its scabbard, and hurled it toward the beam. There was a scream. A dark figure toppled from the rafters and crashed onto the floor. The fall landed badly. A leg twisted with a telltale crack, bending the wrong way. The man's cry of pain cut through the room. Linn hated the sound of someone suffering. He stepped forward and, in one motion, used the gwaihir to open the man's throat. The intruder choked as blood poured out and darkness took him. At that moment, shouting and the clash of combat sounded from outside. Elsewhere in the inn, a different scene was unfolding. A tall figure, over 2 meters, stood in Istrad's room, clad in heavy plate and dragging a greatsword. The man under the covers on the bed had pulled the quilt up over his head. From the raised lump beneath the bedding, it looked for all the world like someone hiding. The armored man snorted and said, from behind his visor, "Only children hide under the covers." He swung his greatsword down hard. The blade tore through quilt and bedboard, but there was no scream, no spurt of blood. The strike felt wrong, hollow, without the resistance of flesh. Puzzled, the knight yanked back the bedding and found not a man, but a human-shaped bundle of pillows used as a decoy. At that moment, the cabinet burst open. Istrad lunged out, dagger in hand, but the knight's reflexes were faster. He batted the dagger from Istrad's grasp with a gauntleted hand, seized him by the throat, and lifted him off the floor like a limp chicken. The knight's voice, muffled by the helmet, rumbled as he spoke. "King Lydé asked me to give you a message, Istrad. He wants you to say hello to that old fellow Baldwin for him when you see him." Hearing the names, King Lydé and Baldwin, made Istrad struggle even more out of blind desperation than hope. The knight smiled inwardly at the reaction. Lydé was the man behind the Povis secession. After the chaos, he had taken power in the broken Povis kingdom. Baldwin Tissin was Istrad's father. Baldwin had once been king of Kovir, but he failed to prevent Povis's split and a rebellion within Kovir itself. The Tissin family had been forced to flee. That flight had ended disastrously. Baldwin had died during their escape, and the Tissins had broken apart, driven into exile in Targor County. Lydé had not been complacent. He had placed spies in Targor and watched the Tissins closely. When Istrad returned, those spies had marked the time and arranged the ambush at this roadside inn. Now, with Istrad choking under the knight's grip, and the rest of the caravan hearing the sounds of battle, the carefully planted net Lydé's men had woven was closing in. Chapter 51. From now on, I will be rich and prosperous, with lots of gold bills. The tall knight tightened his grip on Istrad's neck. The chance to kill a royal wasn't something that came along every day. Besides the honor, he had been promised a huge reward by King Lai Day, a large, fertile estate and the noble title of Earl. Knights barely counted as nobility, but as an Earl he'd be highborn, free from being bossed around. The tall knight was already picturing his future when the door behind him exploded inward. Without thinking, he swung his greatsword backward with one hand. In his mind, Istrad's men would rush in to save their master the moment they saw him captured. The sweeping blow would cut them down. But they didn't charge. Linn didn't charge either. He rolled forward and slipped past the blade. The greatsword's swing had left the tall knight exposed, and Linn closed the distance with brutal precision. He drew his sword and drove it into the gap of the greave at the knight's right knee. Even the heaviest armor had to allow for movement, and that was always a weak spot. The knight howled, instinctively dropping his burden. His right leg couldn't support him. With a desperate lunge from his left leg, he aimed to tackle Linn. At such close range, he believed he couldn't miss, and once he had Linn pinned, he would finish him. But Linn moved like wind, flashing past him. The tall knight's hands scrabbled for purchase on empty air. The only thing waiting for him was the hard floor. Dazed, he tried to push himself up and felt a heavy kick to the side of his head. His full-face helmet took some of the blow, but it still sent him sprawling onto his back. A figure landed on him, flipped open his visor, and pressed a hand flat across his face. Before he could struggle, a cold voice issued the word, "Ard." There was a sick, explosive sound. Blood sprayed like a bursting melon. Linn pulled his hand back to see the knight's face caved in as if struck by a warhammer. He was beyond saving. Linn wiped his hands on a bedsheet from the bed, then looked at Istrad, who was clutching his throat and gasping. "Your Excellency Istrad, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Thank you, Master Linn." Istrad could feel the bruises from the knight's gauntleted grip, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Master Linn, we must leave quickly." Istrad had kept his guard up on the whole journey. He had only relaxed when he set foot in Targor's lands. Targor had many branch families of the Tissan clan and felt like a second home. He had expected an ambush, but not here, not in Targor County. Now that they'd survived, he wanted nothing more than to return to Targor City, the only place he thought offered real shelter. Linn, however, grabbed his shoulder and pulled him farther into the room. "We can't go out," Linn said. "They'll have an ambush outside. We're safest staying in the inn." Footsteps came down the corridor. Linn made a few subtle gestures, sliding Istrad into a shadowed corner away from the window. He moved to the wall beside the door, cast a Quen shield around himself, raised Gwaihir, and readied for whatever came next. 4 or 5 assassins had gathered outside. Their allies had lured Istrad's men to the first floor of the inn. When Istrad didn't show, they were sure he was upstairs. Their leader and his second had already crept up to the second floor. Now the rest pressed forward. There was no movement when they opened the door, but they weren't going to leave without Istrad's head. They charged. The man at the front barely had time to spot Istrad huddled in the corner and the tall knight lying on the floor before a cold glint fell across his face. The sound of steel biting through flesh and cracking bone filled the room. The assassin never had time to raise a hand to block. The blade had already driven into his face. A kick sent his body backward, and the sword traced an arc in the air, converting the chop into a horizontal slash that opened the abdomen of the assassin behind him. Gwaihir cut clean through leather. Blood gushed. The third assassin raised a hand crossbow. This was no heavy military weapon. Light, short-ranged, easy to carry, and perfect for a quick kill. He fired as soon as he saw Linn turn. In his experience, someone in mid-motion couldn't possibly dodge a bolt at such close range. He squeezed the trigger, the string twanged, and the bolt flew. It struck a sudden, bright orange shield and sang harmlessly upward, clattering into the ceiling beam. The assassin threw the hand crossbow like a hidden knife. Linn didn't even flinch. A Master Quen was no fragile thing. The little crossbow couldn't pierce it. He stepped through the edges of the glowing shield and drove his blood-slick blade into the man's gut. The last assassin came down with a longsword from above. He missed. Linn sidestepped, drew Gwaihir free, and cut with a speed and precision the man never saw coming. His legs betrayed him, severed below the knees, and he toppled forward into the bodies of his companions. He tried to rise and scream, but the severed stumps wouldn't obey. His head slumped, and his body was drenched in the steady flow of blood. Chapter 52. King Eddie only needs to be a puppet, and King Ryder has a lot to consider. Not long after, footsteps sounded again. This time, it wasn't an assassin, but a familiar caravan guard. He froze at the sight of so many corpses on the floor, then relaxed when he saw Linn and Istrad alive, and finally let out a long breath. "Sir, Master Linn, are you all right?" Linn nodded. "Where's Geralt?" "Master Geralt is downstairs helping defend against the attackers." Seeing his men and their leader alive eased Istrad considerably. He asked about the situation and learned that the inn's ground floor was firmly under their control, though they couldn't tell how many ambushers were still waiting outside. Someone had tried to rush out during the night, but had been cut down by arrows from beyond. Istrad couldn't help but admire Linn's judgment earlier. The caravan guard looked to Istrad for orders. "Sir, what should we do now?" "We'll stay in the inn until dawn," Istrad said after a moment, then turned to Linn. "Master Linn, anything to add?" Linn shook his head. "A wise decision, Your Excellency. Nothing to add." Istrad treated Linn with polite deference, but with his own men he reverted to the commanding tone of a superior. "Then do as I say." "Yes, sir." The guard bowed slightly and left the room. Soon the guard captain posted men up the corridor and on the stairway from the second floor to the first. The rest crowded downstairs, using tables and chairs in the common room to form a makeshift defensive position. Istrad's room was a scene of bodies and blood. Even if the corpses were removed, the stains would remain for some time. So both Linn and Istrad moved into Linn's room. Neither intended to sleep. Istrad sat away from the window, while Linn set Gwyer in front of him and sat on the floor to meditate. The room remained dark and silent until dawn. When light finally came, Istrad's men ventured to the window and peered out. The road was still and empty. A short while later, the captain sent 2 riders to scout. They returned unharmed, no ambushers in sight. It was impossible to know exactly when the attackers had withdrawn. Linn and the others checked the stable and discovered the 3 men Istrad had left there were dead, throats cut cleanly. Strangely, there were no signs of a struggle. Geralt opened a half-empty wine bottle and sniffed it, catching the faint chemical tang of anesthetic powder. He handed the bottle to Linn, who confirmed the scent. "So that's it. Everything makes sense now," Linn said. Anesthetic powder was a witcher's drug. Mixed into the wine, it explained how those 3 men had offered no resistance. The goods in the carriages seemed untouched, but all the horses had been killed. Whoever had come had not been after goods or standard banditry. The intent had been murder. Istrad's men examined the bodies of the attackers found during the night. They seemed to be from 2 distinct groups. The men killed on the second floor had worn uniform breastplates and chainmail. Their emblems had been scrubbed away, but they were clearly professional soldiers. The raiders on the first floor were a disparate lot: leather armor, padded coats, a jumble of weapons, more like mercenaries than a single unit. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: the attackers had come specifically to kill. A thorough search of the inn under Istrad's command turned up no sign of the innkeeper or the staff who had hosted them. In the cellar, one of the caravan guards found several naked corpses, long dead and submerged in wine vats. There was nothing left on their bodies to prove identity, but given the night's events, they were almost certainly the inn's true owner and staff. Faces around the room grew grim. The leadership and chief beneficiary of the Povis split came to mind: King Lydé. Everyone knew that Lydé's power extended beyond Povis. After the split, King Idi, who had seized power from the Thyssen family, might carry the title of King of Kovir, but in truth, Lydé held real power. King Idi was, for all intents and purposes, a puppet while Lydé pulled strings. The guards argued, "We can't stay here. Who knows when they'll come back? How can we leave? The horses are dead. How are we supposed to move all this cargo on foot?" No one wanted to admit abandoning the goods, quality weapons bought in Mahakam. In a world that treated human life as cheap, many of these men valued their wares more than their own skins. Even if they left the cart behind, marching to Targor City on foot with that many people was unrealistic. Most people in this era were bound to their native soil. Without transport, walking to another town was a grueling prospect. Istrud listened without interrupting. His men were right. They couldn't be certain there hadn't been more attackers, or that more wouldn't return. Staying risked another massacre. But leaving the goods meant massive loss, and a daytime trek on foot made them vulnerable and exhausted if they were struck again. Istrud felt the tension gnaw at him. He noticed Linn and Geralt crouched near the stable, studying something. A sudden, ridiculous idea flashed through his mind, but instead of dismissing it, he latched onto it like a lifeline and stepped forward with cautious hope. Before he could close the distance, Linn held up a hand. "Your Excellency, don't go any further," the young witcher said. "Please stand there and don't move. You'll destroy the traces." "Thanks to everyone who voted monthly and recommended. Thank you for your support." Istrud, who had been uncertain a moment before, felt not annoyance but relief at Linn's warning. "Master, what did you see?" he asked. Istrud's men, who'd been downcast, drew near out of curiosity after hearing the exchange. They'd all caught Linn's warning, so they kept their distance, wary of coming any closer. Mutations had given Witcher's senses far sharper than ordinary men's. They found clues where others saw only rubble. At Kaer Morhen, Vesemir had taught Linn to read and follow traces. What looked like a tangled patch of weeds to common folk was, to a Witcher, a map of motion and intent. "Hoofprints. Many hoofprints," Linn said. "They break down into two kinds, those from the merchant caravan's wagons and those left by the men who attacked us." He traced the prints running from the stable and into the depths of the wood, away from the road, and looked to Geralt. Their gazes met. Geralt's cat-like eyes reflected the same deductions Linn had made. Linn rose, circled the tracks, and approached Istrud. "Sir, I found them," he said. "Found what?" Istrud asked. "The attackers. They came here on horses, not on foot, and I know what happened to the 3 men you left in the stable last night." Linn pointed to the ground near the stable and explained slowly. "Some of the attackers came in as tired travelers. The innkeeper gave 2 bottles of wine, one to your men, one to the strangers. You can guess the rest. The wine given to the attackers was clean. The wine given to your men was laced with anesthetic powder. Anesthetic powder dulls the senses, induces a dreamy euphoria, and makes a man lose proper awareness of the world. The attackers waited until it took effect and slit their throats. Then the attackers struck. When the assault failed, the surviving men mounted and fled on horseback." Istrud stared at the dirt Linn indicated. He blinked and bent closer, straining to see what Linn described, but the marks meant nothing to him. It mattered little. Istrud was a leader who would one day reclaim Kovir and Povis. He knew to put the right people in the right places. Tracking and reading paw prints were not his concern. "Master, can you follow those prints and lead us to their camp?" he asked. "We'll try," Linn said. Geralt and Linn moved out ahead, while Istrud and his men hung back, careful not to disturb the trail. There were wagons to guard. Without horses, they could not be moved, so Istrud left a few men behind to watch them. Although Vesemir had taught Linn much, he had not owned his tracking to Geralt's level. Geralt, never one to waste a teaching opportunity, used the search as a lesson. He showed Linn the reconnaissance techniques he used, then made him find the traces himself. It slowed them, but the experience was worth the delay. Hours passed before they found a small grove. Geralt raised a hand, and Istrad's party immediately dropped to one knee, keeping low to avoid being seen. Through Linn and Geralt's cat's eye vision, they could already make out sentries on the grove's outskirts. "They haven't spotted us yet," Linn said, narrowing his eyes. "I can't tell how many are in the camp." Geralt scanned the ridge and settled his gaze on a low, raised mound nearby. "We should go up there. The view will be better and will be easier to hide." They agreed and moved back to the mound. It rose enough above the ground to conceal them if they kept prone. Someone whispered, voice tight with impatience. "So what now, master?" "We wait till dark," Geralt answered, motioning for calm. "Then we'll decide." Waiting gnawed at them. Even Istrud found himself restless, but he kept silent and patient. Night finally fell. Linn came out of his quiet watchfulness and looked to Geralt. Geralt nodded, then said to Istrud, "Sir, you'd best stay here." "Just the 2 of you? Shall I send more men?" Istrud asked, concern evident. Geralt shook his head. More men mean more trouble. For reconnaissance, 2 are enough. We'll return and plan when we're done. Linn produced 2 small flasks from his pouch and handed one to Geralt. Witcher vision was already superior to that of ordinary men, but cat potions sharpened their sight so they could see through night as if it were day. Under cover of darkness, the 2 slid down the mound and crept toward the grove's camp. The attackers had doubled their night guards, but it mattered little. Many of the men in that region suffered from night blindness and were as good as blind after sundown. Even those who could see at night were hampered by the narrow cone of light a torch threw. Torches lit a much smaller area than most imagined. Between those limitations and Linn and Geralt's enhanced sight, they reached the edge of the camp without difficulty. Because the Witcher moved almost soundlessly, the attackers' sentries, though plentiful, would have a hard time spotting Linn and Geralt as long as the 2 avoided the torchlit areas. Once they'd closed in, Linn began to study the camp. It was small. Wooden palisades and chevaux de frise ringed the perimeter as a crude defense. Dozens of tents clustered in the center, and the leader clearly took precautions. Sentries had been posted at the forest's edge, and Linn could see patrols with torches walking just inside the fence. Several bonfires burned within the camp, and 20 or 30 armed men in mismatched clothing hunched around them, roasting meat. After a few minutes of watching, Linn formed a plan. He gently tapped Geralt's shoulder and mouthed, "Geralt, we can go. Let's fall back. I've got a plan." In the largest tent of the enemy camp, Eredin sat alone on a wooden crate. The tent's interior felt empty and cold compared with the lively circle of men and firelight outside, but Eredin seemed unaffected. He sipped from a wooden bowl of broth. Suddenly he froze. In the surface of the broth, a pair of cat-school eyes reflected back at him. He dropped the bowl. The soup sloshed across the tent floor. A mercenary outside heard the crash and darted in. "Boss?" Eredin waved him off. "I'm fine." He stopped the younger man from moving to clean up. "Have our men sent to contact King Lai Day's subordinates returned?" "Not yet." "All right." Dismissed. When the mercenary left, Eredin set the bowl aside and let the memory sweep over him. He had been an orphan, one of countless children left parentless by war, famine, and disease. He could not remember his life before becoming a Witcher apprentice. The training had devoured everything else. The endless drills, the brutal sword work, the pain of mutations. The master's cruelty had been a constant. Day after day of punishment and physical torment nearly broke him. His mentor was erratic and violent, a man whose temper and methods made life feel like walking through fire. Eredin survived the cat school's trial of the grasses, the trial with a survival rate of barely 3 in 10. The toxins and alchemical changes left him altered, but what happened after his mentor's death changed him more than any potion. He could have saved the man during a hunting commission, but the mentor was ripped apart by the monster. Eredin stood and watched as his mentor was torn like a rag, blood on his hands. Instead of shattering him, that moment flipped a switch. Where there had been paranoia and impulsiveness, a cold clarity took root. The mutations from the trial left him physically superior to ordinary men. The sharpened mind that followed his mentor's death made him ruthless and focused. He decided he would not spend the rest of his life begging for coins, risking everything for a few coppers and scorn from others. He was tired of being despised and of feeling worthless. He was tired of the smell that clung to him, the stench of a life that drove away any thought of companionship. He wanted respect, not hunger and humiliation. So he made a plan. He recruited the desperate and the cruel and forged them into a company of mercenaries. That part was easy in this age. Many would sell their conscience for food and a roof. With Witcher's speed, strength, and the cat school's bladecraft, his band was almost unstoppable. Jobs came, and with success came reputation. Eredin discovered he had a taste for business as well as violence. He did not squander his gains on drink and women like his men. He invested in dirtier, more lucrative trades, human trafficking, narcotics, brothels. He didn't bother with morals. Money was all that mattered, and it came fast. He grew rich. He planned one final huge job that would let him walk away from the life of constant risk and focus on his enterprises. But things had not gone according to plan. The operation he had staged with his men and the soldiers sent by King Lai Day had failed. When he returned to the temporary camp with the survivors, he sent word to King Lai Day's agents. "The enemy is stronger than you claimed. I won't proceed unless you pay more." Jia wasn't the sort to bow before titles. The mutations and the life he'd carved out made him disdain nobles and kings who rode on the accidents of birth. To him, they were no grander than any commoner who had simply not had to fight for food. He did not imagine a modest price increase would upset King Lai Day. Even if he completed the mission for the original sum, the nobles would still see him as nothing. They were born with everything. How could they pity or respect those who bargained for their lives? A cold wind cut through the tent. Voices turned to shouts and curses. Jiade's hand went to his steel sword. He rose and ran out into the night. The camp was in chaos. Men ran and cried alarms. Torches bobbed, and men shouted orders that dissolved in the clamor. Chapter 55. Shut up, motherfucker. Let's rewind a little. After Linn and Geralt finished their reconnaissance and returned to the hill where Istrad and the others were hiding, they reported what they had seen. "There are about 40 armed men in the camp," Linn said. "Their gear is mixed, typical mercenary stuff. Their leader is cautious," Geralt added. "He's posted a lot of sentries around the camp and keeps patrols moving inside." Istrad's face darkened as he listened. His men had already examined the bodies at the inn and told him there were two groups among the attackers, one of professional soldiers and one of mercenaries. He hadn't expected the mercenaries to be so numerous. His own force was loyal and brave, but outnumbered. If they clashed outright, it would likely end in mutual ruin. "Master, should we slip away under cover of night?" one of his men asked. They couldn't afford to waste their manpower here. There were still King Lai Day's men somewhere unknown, and Istrad needed to get back to Targor City safely to finish his business. As for the goods from Mahakam and Novigrad, unfortunate, but perhaps they had no choice. "No," Linn said. His answer surprised Istrad. He paused, then smiled as he explained. "They have horses, quite a few. We need horses to haul our goods, and since they're allied with the other attackers, interrogating them will give us the location and rendezvous point of the rest. That way, we can bypass them without alerting anyone." Istrad considered it, agreement slowly easing into his features, but he still hesitated. "There are too many of them. I worry we might—" He didn't finish the sentence. Linn already understood. "I have a plan. You and your men lie in ambush over there. Geralt and I will drive the enemy toward you. Then you can cook them a proper welcome with crossbow bolts and steel." The idea lit Istrad's eyes. If it worked, they could take the camp with almost no losses. "How do you intend to drive them?" he asked. Linn produced a small glass device. "Very simple. With this." He showed a dancing star bomb. He and Geralt had stocked up on alchemical materials in Novigrad. With enough alchemical bombs, the two of them could wreak astonishing destruction. Linn explained briefly what an alchemical bomb did. Istrad's relief turned to delight, and he insisted they would be compensated for whatever bombs they used once they returned to Targor City. Linn had planned to ask for payment, but Istrad beat him to it, which suited Linn fine. They began preparations. They didn't need sword oils against human foes, but potions were necessary, especially facing a mercenary company of over 40. Linn's plan was to use alchemical bombs to herd them toward the ambush point rather than fight them all directly. But readiness was common sense. The trial of the grasses had made witchers stronger than ordinary men, but a witcher who took his potions was a complete witcher. If, in the older tales, Geralt had drunk potions before trying to stop whatever happened in Rivia, the joke about pitchforks being witcher-killing objects might never have existed. They crept to the edge of the camp. Geralt mouthed to Linn, "Ready?" "Let's begin," Linn answered. Linn tossed a slender glass bottle filled with a pale blue liquid. It struck a tree near a sentry and shattered. A savage cold burst out, and ice spread instantly. The nearest sentry, who had just turned toward the sound, was frozen mid-motion, turned into a lifelike statue of ice. It was the power of a northern wind bomb. "Enemy attack!" Screams split the night. In the chaos, Linn and Geralt threw more dancing star bombs and dragon's dream bombs. Explosions and fire roared through the camp. What the two of them created sounded and looked like the work of many more assailants. The mercenaries had seen war, but few had ever seen alchemical bombs. Such things were rarer than witchers, and hardly any witcher would waste them. With no better explanation, the only thing the mercenaries could think of was sorcery. "Wizards! It's wizards!" The cry spread panic. A prepared sorcerer, casting from who knows where, seemed unbeatable. Fear became contagious. The mercenaries bolted for the trees, desperate to flee the burning camp. As they ran into the forest and thought themselves in safety, crossbow bolts hissed through the night and felled them like cut wheat. Inside the burning camp, however, the noise faded into an eerie hush. Linn and Geralt had split up to sow more confusion. Linn stumbled upon a big fish, another witcher with cat-like eyes. "Wolf School, since when did you take assassination contracts?" the newcomer snarled. Giaday's face was twisted with rage. Veins stood out on his temples, and he smelled strongly of potions. He spat onto the ground, feeling as if 10,000 wild horses were trampling his mind. If he'd known the target was protected by a witcher, he never would have taken the job, or stayed in the camp after the attack failed. Linn recognized him instantly. Younger than the Giaday in the stories, but unmistakably the cat school witcher who'd wanted to break the witcher code and hoped to be the first to die peacefully in his bed. Linn shook his head. "I'm not like you. We took a protection job." "Call me what you like, little wolf pup," Giaday said, sheathing his sword with exaggerated calm and spreading his hands. "There's no need for brothers of the road to spill each other's blood. Witchers are scarce enough. If one or two more die in infighting, it's a waste." Before he could finish, Giaday's wrist flicked and a hidden sleeve arrow shot out, its cold metal glinting as it flew toward Linn. But Linn had already read the move and flashed Igni. A burst of flame lit the air. Giaday barely managed to dodge the blaze aimed at his brow. "Treacherous cat school," one of them spat. "Despicable little wolf pup," Giaday answered, surprised that his opponent had anticipated him. He drew his steel blade and charged. They didn't circle, they met. Steel sang as swords crossed in a deadly dance, each clash sending sparks into the night. Giaday's mutations gave him speed and reflexes, but his skill wasn't yet at its peak. Linn, the better swordsman, found the gap in his defense and exploited it. A swift, brutal cut opened Giaday's abdomen. He cried out, dropped his sword, and stumbled back. Linn kicked him toward a burning tent and followed up with a long diagonal slash from the collarbone down, blood sprayed. Giaday sank to his knees, staring at the wound as if it could be unmade by will alone. Linn raised his Goyer sword, ready to end it. Giaday looked up, eyes glittering with hatred and a desperate, wasted regret. "My career was just starting to take off. I hadn't even had time to chase the woman I love. I can't die here." Linn gave him no chance to finish. A cold light flashed across the camp, and the world went silent. Chapter 56. Need to pay extra. When the fighting inside the camp finally ceased, the skirmish beyond the trees ended as well. None of Giaday's men got away. Most were cut down by crossbow bolts. Only a handful were taken prisoner. The captain of the guard marched a small squad off to interrogate them and returned sometime later with blood-stained clothes and hard-won answers. As Istrad and his men had suspected, the attack had not been a random raid. The mastermind was King Lydé of Povis. The king had hired Giaday's mercenaries and sent his own soldiers to ambush and eliminate Istrad and his party. After the raid failed, Giaday had led his band back to this temporary camp and sent one man off to the rendezvous where the king's forces were stationed. That meant if they waited here and intercepted the messenger, they might learn the enemy's next ambush plans. They set to work at once. First, they doused the campfires so no smoke would give them away. Then, they dragged the mercenaries' bodies away from the forest edge. Finally, they concealed themselves among the trees and laid in wait. While they were preparing, Linn found Istrad. "Sir, those attackers weren't ordinary bandits, were they? They seemed to be aiming specifically at this caravan." As an outsider unaware of many things, it was natural for him to voice the question. Not to would have been strange. Istrad let out a relieved breath. Clearly, he had expected Linn to ask. "Hunter Master Linn, you're right. They were after me." "I didn't conceal it on purpose," Istrad added after a moment. "There was a reason I couldn't tell you then. I promise, once we reach Targor City, I will explain everything." Rocky rode back toward the camp exhausted and starving. He had left with only a hard, cold piece of black bread that had barely filled him and nearly chipped a tooth. After delivering his master's message to King Day's men, he had attempted to beg for a bite. They had thrown him out. To those nobles, Day's crew were no more than brigands, and asking them for food was an insult. Rocky had no choice but to push on, aching from hours in the saddle. At last he saw the small copse where the temporary camp had been. He tried to rally himself, but something was wrong. There were no sentries at the forest's edge. The place was unnaturally quiet, dead silent, which made his skin prickle. Before he could fully register the danger, a crossbow bolt flashed from the trees and drove into his horse's eye, straight into its brain. The beast collapsed without a whimper, throwing Rocky and pinning him under its bulk. Footsteps slammed in from all sides. A ring of strangers closed around him. "Don't move," a voice warned. Back at the camp, the captain of the guard approached Istrad and offered a parchment. Istrad took it, scanned it, then passed it to Linn. The page showed a hand-drawn map of Targor County covered in clear markings. "Hunter Masters," the captain said, standing rigidly with his hands behind him. "The prisoners confessed. King Day's men agreed to Day's demand for more gold. These marks are the rendezvous points and the locations where they plan to ambush us again. They don't know their plan has been compromised. If we move on those rendezvous, we might catch them off guard." Istrad was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Hunter Masters, what do you think?" Geralt considered the map and replied, "The enemy doesn't know we have this. That's our advantage. We can avoid them or walk into their meeting spots and surprise them as we choose." Linn nodded. "I agree. Day's camp has horses we can use too." The captain blinked. "And King Day's men?" "Forget about them," Linn said firmly. "Our priority is to reach Targor City safely." They had attacked Day's camp to secure horses and the enemy's plans. Now that they had both, another battle was unnecessary and unwise. Their alchemical bombs, which had helped sow panic in the earlier fight, had been almost entirely expended. Without those, a pitched battle might be safe for Linn and Geralt, but Istrad's men could take casualties they didn't need. Istrad nodded. "Very well. Captain, tell the others we're returning to the inn." As they walked back toward the inn, Istrad fell into step beside Linn and lowered his voice. "Hunter Master Linn, forgive my boldness, but I've wondered something for some time." Linn looked at him. "Ask. Would a witcher take up service as a king's vassal?" Linn understood the question. In Edelsburg, when he had recognized Istrad's true station and made his own moves, it had not been one-sided. Each had been gauging the other. Ambitions and bargains had been in the air from both sides. Chapter 57, Our Cause is Just. Linn paused before answering. "Your Excellency, if I were to answer by the book, I'd say, witchers usually try to avoid politics. It only makes our lives harder." Istrad's eyes brightened. "You mean if?" "Yes, if." "Very well. Let's suppose this scenario. A king, exiled in a foreign land but with a strong claim to his throne, promises a witcher that if he helps him return and reclaim his crown, he will be ennobled. Would such a witcher agree?" It was almost a direct hint. With everyone's cards essentially on the table, Linn dropped the pretense. "Your Excellency, a witcher's habit is to negotiate a fair price before taking any job. I imagine that witcher would first ask what the king intended to offer. I'd think he'd be generous. An earl's title, lands to match, perhaps more. In that case, I think he'd be glad to help a rightful king return to his people." The caravan returned to the inn and hitched the pack horses they'd taken from Day's mercenaries to the carriage. The horses weren't as fine as those the caravan had used before, but they were better than nothing. With them, the group could keep the carriage and push on. Everyone, hardened by the road, preferred camping to the uncertain comfort of small-town inns, so they camped and traveled for several more days. Finally, they reached Targor City. Targor lay at the foot of the Flying Dragon Range, walled and built with many steep roofs. A broad, deep artificial moat circled the high walls, with a single bridge that could be raised to bar the way. Gallows stood on the plain outside the city, indeed a token of Targor's reputation. A long line waited to enter on the bridge. When Linn's group reached the head of the line, the guards moved in to inspect them, but Istrad stopped them and flashed the ring on his finger. The men immediately recognized the Thyssen family signet. "Forgive us, your lordship. We did not recognize you." "May we pass?" Istrad asked flatly. "Of course. Please enter." Once inside, Istrad handed the caravan over to the guard captain and left quickly with only a few attendants. He was anxious to see Targor's ruler, Benefica. There had been an assassination attempt by King Lai Day on the road, and Istrad wanted to speak with her. Before he left, he told Linn and Geralt he would settle their pay and any outstanding matters once he had concluded his business. Now that their escort work was complete, Linn and Geralt had no obligation to follow the caravan. They took rooms at an inn, bathed, and washed the road from their bones. In the evening, Istrad returned, dressed no longer as a merchant, but in fine noble clothes. He sat without beating around the bush. "I know both of you have many questions. I promise to be frank. Now is the time." He took a breath, his hands gripping his knees as if steadying himself. "My full name is Istrad Thyssen. You're a descendant of Baldwin Thyssen, who once ruled Kovir?" Geralt asked, surprised. The question pulled a frown from Geralt. He hadn't hoped to be entangled with nobility. More often than not, jobs that began as straightforward monster contracts ended in court intrigues. Witchers of his standing had little choice but to accept what they could and try to leave unmolested. He'd long learned the simplest way to deal with nobles: flatter enough to keep them satisfied, take the coin, and go. Istrad shook his head at Geralt's bland civility. "No need for that, Master Geralt. You guessed right. Baldwin Thyssen was my father's line." He went on without prompting. "When the throne of Kovir and Povis passed from my grandfather to my father, trouble wasn't far off. The so-called Povis secession began when a noble from Povis, Lai Day, declared himself king and cut Povis loose from the realm. Other city-states followed. The whole kingdom splintered. The unrest in Povis sparked rebellion inside Kovir. A powerful vassal, Marquis Edi, seized the throne from my father. The Thyssen family lost power and fled. We took refuge in Targor County, which had also declared independence. During our escape, my father fell ill and died. We were at our lowest. Benefica, ruler of Targor, took us in. Many branches of the Thyssen family remained here and helped. That is how I survived." As Istrad spoke, Geralt's unease grew. He cut him off. "One moment, Your Excellency. I think I understand where you're heading, but if you continue, we won't be able to leave." Had Istrad been any other noble, an interruption like that might have been met with anger. Istrad didn't bristle. "Master Geralt, if you're worried about payment, I swear by the Thyssen name you will be treated fairly. Will that calm your doubts?" Geralt shook his head. "It isn't about coin." Istrad's expression vexed. "Then what is it?" "The Witcher Code is neutrality," Geralt said firmly. "We don't take part in political struggles." Istrad had heard of that code, who hadn't, but he didn't press the matter. Instead, he reached into a satchel and laid out two heavy pouches, a small circular disc the size of a palm, and an exquisitely crafted signet ring on the table. "Each of these bags contains 500 crowns, he said. "Master Geralt, I know what you'll say. Hear me out. I'm not the sort to force anyone. Since you value neutrality, I won't make things difficult. The payment we agreed on was 200 crowns per person, but you saved my life and those of my men on the road more than once. My gratitude is not merely words. Please accept them." He tapped the disc. "This is Neneki's eye, a magic item that allows one to see through illusions. You two face dangers I cannot guess. Take it." He held up the ring. "And this signet bears the Thyssen silver hand. If you run into trouble, take it to the Rustwater conglomerate headquarters in Novigrad and present the ring. It will win you assistance. But keep it safe. If it falls to someone who shouldn't have it, trouble for me will follow." Geralt knew the Rustwater conglomerate by reputation, the largest merchant house in Kovir, a cover for intelligence and operations. After the Thyssens lost power, it had ostensibly sided with King Edi, but in reality the family's influence remained. Istrad was not merely offering coins, he was offering access and an item that cut through illusions. All of it meant he was ready to risk much to gain allies. Linn kept his face calm, but inside he was stirred. Istrad had bared himself. The disc and the ring were not things a scion would hand over lightly. The ring especially was likely given only to the most trusted, a token of recognition that could be treated as identification in dangerous times. If it fell into the wrong hands, disaster might follow. That Istrad offered it spoke to how desperate, how determined he was. Geralt did not hesitate to pick up the coin pouches. The money was fair. But the eye and the ring were different. To take the ring, to accept the sign of a house embroiled in a claim to power, would be to take a side. Geralt had spent decades avoiding those whirlpools. He would not throw that away now. Before he could refuse, Linn reached out and took both the Neneki's eye and the signet ring. Chapter 58. Oh, I mean fate. Thank you for your generosity, Your Excellency. Linn? Geralt paused, about to say more, but Istrad had already stood and was heading for the door. Then I should be going as well. If the two masters are willing, you might as well stay in Targor City for a while longer. There's a commission here that needs you, and while you stay in Targor City, all expenses will be on my tab. No sooner had Istrad left than Geralt turned to Linn with a frown. Linn, what are you thinking? We shouldn't get involved in politics. Have you forgotten everything Vesemir taught you? A witcher should remain neutral. Linn shook his head. No, I haven't forgotten. Then why did you take his signet? Geralt's words came out more flustered than intended, but Linn understood perfectly. The White Wolf was reproaching him for keeping the signet ring Istrad had given. If anyone in the Wolf School most closely embodied the Witcher Code, it was Geralt. And true to his role in this story, trouble had a way of finding him, or, as this world would say, destiny did. Linn could see Geralt's point, but times had changed. Geralt, in this world humans, elves, dwarves, and gnomes all play the game of power. Why should only witchers abstain? Because it's dangerous, Geralt answered without hesitation. Getting involved will only make things harder for us. Linn spread his hands. But if we insist on staying neutral, won't the political maelstrom drag us in anyway? Geralt fell silent. He knew Linn was right. Even if witchers wanted neutrality, they would inevitably be drawn into things. A principled stance often backfires. Outsiders interpret neutrality as indifference, or worse, as cowardice and fence-sitting. People don't like fence-sitters in any world. At the very least, he said gloomily, we should try to avoid it. Geralt might not realize it, but Linn understood him better than Geralt understood himself. Linn knew Geralt to be almost saintly in his nobility, closer to a paragon than to any priest. But nobility doesn't protect those around you. In the original tales, if Geralt had been a bit more flexible, he could have escaped the wandering fate that doomed others like Vesemir, Eskel, and Lambert. Now that he was in this world, the opportunity was to change the arc of the story and steer the timeline away from that tragic future. There were no bronze dragons here to safeguard history, so Linn needed Geralt to listen to him, not the other way round. Geralt, Linn said quietly, I know you're saying this for my sake, but believe me, I'm doing this for the Witchers, not just the Wolf School, for every Witcher school. If we don't act soon, Witchers might truly go extinct. The room fell quiet. After a long moment, Geralt sighed and spoke slowly, as though yielding. All right, Linn, I can't convince you. You've thought a lot about this, much more than I have. You've said true things before, even if I didn't understand them all. But I can tell you have a plan. It's not a whim. I won't stop you, Geralt finished, but I hope you know what you're doing. Linn exhaled. He had expected it would take more effort to sway Geralt. Getting this concession was the best outcome he could have hoped for. The Witcher Code's rule of neutrality made sense when the Order was founded, but the world had moved on. Linn, who could foresee the likely future, wouldn't passively wait for disaster to hit. If catastrophe was inevitable, why not prepare and take the initiative? So he made a choice that betrayed ancestral teachings. Ever since the Thyssen family's rule in Kovir and Povis had been overthrown and they were driven into exile, Istrad had quietly plotted to reclaim the throne. He gathered supporters until the time was right and then launched a decisive war of succession. The usurpers, Kings Lydé and Idi, did not sit idle. They each struck back. In the end, however, Istrad prevailed. Lydé, Idi, and their families were wiped out in what would later be called the Night of Knives and Torches. It was because Linn knew how that war would unfold that he agreed to help Istrad. He wasn't naive. He understood the risks of taking part in a coup. But Witchers already faced constant danger in their work. Compared to hauling a drowned body out of the water for a few coins, the potential gains from siding with Istrad were enormous. Granting a Witcher vassalage would be a political boon for Istrad. Allowing a Witcher to hold land and title signaled a benevolent stance toward Witchers and might attract the few remaining Witchers to Kovir. Witchers could handle monsters that threatened the countryside, letting farmers till their fields and soldiers at the front worry less about families at home. Moreover, the unique Lirin brought about by Witcher mutations could help guards solve murders and catch killers, protecting lives and property. And when foreign foes invaded, Witchers would take up arms to defend the realm. Linn had laid out these benefits for Istrad, and that was what convinced Istrad to make the firm promise. He would grant Linn the title of Count and lands. Exactly where that land would be and how much more might be earned would depend on Linn's future contributions. Thanks to Misaka 4279, Leave My Bed, Luke, and Sunren O for the rewards. Thanks also to everyone who voted with monthly and recommendation tickets. Your support is much appreciated. Chapter 59. How can a man's road to progress be filled with laughter? How can a man's road to progress be filled with storms? Linn wasn't worried that Istrad would use Witchers as pawns. Istrad was one of the few truly wise kings among the northern rulers, nor did Linn mind becoming Istrad's vassal. Why? Because being a vassal was only the first step. The first pot of gold is always the hardest to come by. Once he had that seat of power, with his foresight, he would expand, carve out a realm, and found a nation where Witchers, humans, gnomes, dwarves, and elves could live as one family in peace and equality, developing and prospering together. Of course, Linn knew the other northern kings and sorcerers would never tolerate Witchers prospering. If they learned that mere Witchers dared set their sights on a throne, they'd surely unite in an unprecedented encirclement to annihilate them. But that didn't worry Linn. Before long, those rivals wouldn't have the leisure to fuss over Witchers. This was a great upheaval unseen in 100 years, a time of both great opportunity and terrible danger. Still, it was too early to act. Linn estimated Istrad would have to wait a few years before attempting to reclaim the throne. War wasn't something that started the moment two armies met. It began long before, recruiting soldiers, raising funds and supplies, forging and gathering swords, axes, maces, polearms, spears, halberds, bows, crossbows, and arrows, establishing intelligence networks inside enemy territory, learning troop deployments, movement routes, the state of their equipment, counting allies and potential defectors. Linn figured that by the time Istrad was ready, he would be ready too, strong enough, his attributes improved, to take part in the conflict. A weathered voice cut through his thoughts. "You thinking about something, Master Witcher?" A burly, middle-aged captain with a thick, dwarf-like beard was leaning against the barge's rail. The oar's steady rhythm and the passenger's chatter snapped Linn back to the present. He dug at his ear, a little annoyed. "Yeah, what's up? Did someone spot something?" "No, nothing," the captain said, wiping his hands on his leather jerkin. "The water's calm, but the fog's thick. Pirates could appear out of it at any moment." Linn chuckled. "Ghost ships, eh? Pirates are sneaky, but not that sneaky. The mist hides them as much as it hides us. Don't worry, I'm keeping watch. I haven't gone soft." The captain stepped away from the rail toward the stern. "Still, if we reach Novigrad in one piece, I'll buy you a drink." He pushed through scattered luggage and packs. Horses crowded the center of the barge, snorting and clattering their hooves. The bow sliced through the fog-shrouded water. It had been a week since Istrad had paid him. Geralt had taken a job guarding a mine near Targor City. That mine had been thought haunted, so the owner wanted a Witcher to look into it. Linn hadn't gone with him. Instead, he left Targor City, mounted on the black horse Istrad had given him. He'd named the horse Nidhogg, and had ridden back to the coastal dock of Targor County, where he took a barge for Novigrad. As the North's jewel, Novigrad would have no shortage of contracts. Geralt hadn't stopped Linn. After more than half a year adventuring together, Geralt had learned he needn't fret over Linn's safety. Compared to other Witchers of the Wolf School, Linn had already received a great deal of care. After all, whatever trials a Witcher completed, be it Vesemir, Eskel, Lambert, Berengar, or others, once the trials were done, each walked down the mountain alone. Witchers weren't Jedi. There was no custom of a master always accompanying an apprentice. Linn appreciated Geralt's concern all the same. Half an hour later, the captain came over again. Linn sighed. What now? The captain leaned against the rail beside him. Thank the gods, no incidents. Looks like this'll be a safe trip. We're nearly into Novigrad waters. Pirates don't usually risk the coast. Isn't that good? Linn asked. It is, the captain said with a rueful smile. But I'll be honest, I envy you. Linn raised an eyebrow. How so? The captain's voice was tinged with envy. Whether there's danger or not, you still get paid the same, don't you? You hire me to ride along as a precaution, and travelers feel safer because there's a witcher aboard. Some folk may mouth off about witchers, but when it comes down to it, they prefer you alive and on their side. Linn spread his hands, partly amused, partly speechless. You think no danger is better for me than danger? You get the pay either way, the captain said with a laugh. So you interested in steady work? It might not pay like monster bounties, but it's safer. What do you say? Linn waved him off. I'll take your boat again if I need one, but long term, not for me. After that, the captain left him be for the rest of the voyage. The barge reached Novigrad without incident. Standing among the bustling dock workers and the moored ships, Linn gave a wry smile. Trouble seemed to avoid him. He wasn't the tragic hero of A Knight's Tale. One last note. The timing of Istrad's restoration isn't described precisely in the original novel, but in this version, his return has been pushed back a bit to suit the book's plot development. Here, Istrad is portrayed as a wise king, so there will be no later plot where he fears the protagonist's achievements and acts against him. Chapter 60. I've never seen such a request in my life. He disembarked at Novigrad's port and took the purse the captain handed him. In front of the man, he counted the crowns inside. Only after confirming the pouch contained nothing but crowns, no silver, no copper mixed in, did Linn leave, satisfied. He rode Nidhogg, the black mare Istrad had given him, into the steady drizzle and threaded his way through Novigrad's port quarter. He politely rebuffed the roadside prostitutes and kept clear of rattling merchant carriages, and before long found himself in the city's central square. Notice boards stood in prominent places. Several bore the usual trifles. Looking for a lost cat? Need to get a lazy man off the sofa? Teaching youth not to dream of being kept by others? Linn's mouth twitched. What on earth? Then his eye caught a fresh sheet of parchment pinned at the very bottom of the board, and his expression grew serious. I am Sigismund Grog, professor at Oxenfurt University. I require a private detective, a bounty hunter, to help find a missing student. Though I am only a professor and cannot offer much in the way of reward, I will not be stingy in my gratitude. Whoever will assist is asked to come to Oxenfurt University as soon as possible. Give my name at the gate, and you will be admitted. Note, please hurry. The time since my student disappeared has already exceeded the golden rescue period. Each day that passes further reduces her chances of survival. Missing, huh? He could take a look. If the notice said the reward wasn't much, a professor from Oxenfurt wouldn't be offering coin in vain. Linn rode past guards dozing with their long pikes and left the pearls of Novigrad behind. Thunder rolled and lightning flashed under the sullen clouds. Once clear of the city, he galloped along country roads. The rain thinned the traffic outside the walls. Witchers don't get colds, thanks to their mutations. That was one reason Linn didn't mind traveling in wet weather. After several hours, the high walls of Oxenfurt rose into view. Oxenfurt, nestled between the Boon and Pana rivers southeast of Novigrad, sits within Redania and clusters tightly around Oxenfurt University. Narrow lanes and timbered houses with bright spires crowd the city, which lives by and for the university. The place throbs with life, students, scholars, and the trades that spring up to serve them. Tens of thousands of odd and wondrous things, some ingenious, some useless, were conceived and sold here. Inns and taverns, market stalls, and portable grills wafted an incessant parade of rich smells. Even the condiments and side dishes seemed unique to the place. The clever, restless folk of Oxenfurt took the dry, theoretical nonsense from the university and little by little made it a noisy, colorful, fragrant town. Festivals and revels never truly ended. The streets buzzed with music and laughter day and night, and goblets and tankards clinked constantly. After all, there is nothing more thirst-inducing than the pursuit of knowledge, and perhaps nothing that makes a town drink more than rules forbidding it. The rector might forbid students and tutors from carousing before dusk, but that did not stop the populace. Linn rode Nidhogg down a muddy, crowded lane, passing workshops, studios, stalls, and shops of every size. Hawkers and charlatans blared their wares, filling the air. Grilled squid, fresh from the pontar. Miracle balm, heals every blotch and scab, one kind, reliable. Cats for rat catching, spirit cats, gentle and sure, come hear them meow. Amulets, elixirs, aphrodisiacs, love potions, one sip and you'll feel heavenly. Who wants to buy? My lord, spare a moment to hear of our Father and Savior, the eternal flame. He passed the tall facade of the Rosebud brothel. The women at its door were plainly a cut above those at Novigrad's docks. If it were Geralt, he'd have loved this place, Linn thought with a faintly critical smile. He had no intention of going in, even if it looked very high-end. Please dismount, sir. Oxenfurt University only allows foot traffic within the grounds, the woman at the gate said, eyeing him up and down. She was young and pretty, no older than 20, with spectacles perched on her nose. Linn obeyed and swung down. I'm here on Professor Grogg's commission, he said. She pushed her glasses up. Professor Grogg? Oh yes, he did post a notice. So are you a private detective or a bounty hunter? Linn did not hide what he was. With those cat-like eyes, he could not pretend otherwise. To be precise, I'm a witcher. Her face lit with surprised curiosity. A witcher? I've heard the rumors, but I never thought I'd actually see one. It's my first time. Linn bowed with a mock flourish, as a gentleman might to a noblewoman. Of course we exist. We still stand on the front line to protect people. But, if you don't mind, I should speak to Professor Grogg. I understand the matter cannot be delayed. She blinked, like someone waking from a pleasant daydream. Oh yes, all right, there's just one last question. I'm listening. Her eyes shone as if she were looking at some rare creature. You don't carry any infectious diseases, do you? May I touch you?